My name is Christy Craig. I'm the publisher at Hidden Timber Books. And the first thing that I want to do today before we get started with our event is just acknowledge what's been going on around the country and in Minneapolis and in Milwaukee here. There have been, yesterday, I think protesters walked a total of 12 miles around the city to different parts of the city. So there's a lot going on, and for good reason. And it's important to pay attention. And, you know, part of the reason I do these small press author readings is to bring to light some of the stories that often aren't in the mainstream that you maybe aren't familiar with. So with that in mind, and with what's been going on, I just wanted to share with you this book that I have. It's called Black Ink, and it's a collection of essays. It's a wonderful book. I can't remember how I came upon it, but it's just a really great book. It's very educational. It's about literacy and in American history for the you know, for the population of Black people, and it brings together essays from famous writers in the past and current writers today. And I'll just read a sentence or two from the book jacket. It says, "In all of American history, Black people were the only group ever to be forbidden by law to learn to read. This unique collection sheds light on that injustice, as well as the hard-won literary progress made." So again, it's a wonderful book to check out and to read and educate ourselves and become great upstanders and strong allies. So I just wanted to mention that first. And now today, again, my name is Christy Craig. I'm from Hidden Timber Books. And I am so thrilled to welcome Shuly Cawood today. We are celebrating Short Story Month. Today is the very last day of Short Story Month. And so I'm thrilled to have her share some from her collection of stories in honor of that month. If you have any technical troubles, you can pop into the chat box and just drop me a note. I will keep an eye out on that and try to help solve those problems as soon as I can. And again, this is recorded, just so you know. But I want to thank Shuly for being here today, for helping us close out Short Story Month. Just to give you a little bit of information about her, she is a poet, a memoirist, and a novelist. Her poetry won the 2019 Adrian Bond Award and will be published by Mercer University Press in 2021, which is pretty cool to have a book out now and then one coming up next year right away. Her writing has been published in the Sun magazine and Brevity and the Rumpus and more. And you can find out information about her work, including her new collection, on her website, where she blogs about life, love, and determination. And I will drop a link to her website in the chat box so you can take a look at that and bookmark it so you can check out information on her book and order a copy for yourselves later. So again, thank you, Shuly, for being here. I'm going to be in the background, and I'll let her do her thing, and then we'll have some Q&A. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask everyone to mute yourselves while she does her reading and discussion. And then when we get to the Q&A, you can, we'll kind of go down the line and you can unmute yourselves and talk to her directly if you like. So I'll pass the baton to you, Shuly.
Thank you. Thank you all for taking part of your Sunday afternoon, especially I can see, like I said, that it's lovely out where all of you all are. So thank you for taking time to come listen to me and to hear some things about my book and about my writing journey. And also thank you, Christy, for having me. I know a lot of work goes on behind the scenes for you to put these together, and I really appreciate you having me. I'm going to spend about probably 20 to 30 minutes talking about my writing journey from the very beginning when I was a little baby. No, but from the very beginning. And then I'll do a short 2-page reading. I tend to like to hear authors talk about their lives more than I like to hear them read from their books, but I will do a short reading at the very end. And I would love to have your questions about anything that you want. So from a very, very early age, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And in junior high, I started writing short stories. But very early on, because that seed was planted that I knew I wanted to be a writer, I always imagined I'd have a book one day. And it's kind of funny thinking now about how such a small seed can be planted, but it ends up coming true one day for a lot of us. So I started writing short stories. I was actually very terrible at them, but I thought I was really good at the time. But I quickly moved on to poetry by high school. And in college, I went to a very small liberal arts school in Ohio and studied poetry. I loved poetry and really thought that I would go on afterwards and go on and get a master's of fine arts in poetry when I graduated from my university. So going to a small school, the wonderful part about that for me is that I got to know my professors really well, and I was very close to them. So that meant that they knew me pretty well. They knew about my personality, my writing. And when I told them I was interested in graduate school, getting a master's of fine arts in poetry, they said, you know what, Shuly, you really need to take some time off first and just go out into the world and work for a while before you think about graduate school. That would be really good for you. Now I'm not so sure why they said that, but that's okay. I heeded that advice, and I started looking for work by spring of my senior year, and I wasn't finding work. I had a nice little cute English degree, and it wasn't really doing me any good at that point in terms of work. So I kept looking, and I graduated in June, still didn't have a job, and my mother said, you know what, you should apply to graduate school as a backup plan. And she meant I was looking at jobs, and I saw that a lot of the jobs that I was interested in asked for a degree in journalism. So her idea was apply to journalism school as a backup plan. Well, this seemed like a good idea to me. So in July, I applied to the only school in my region that had a good journalism school and was still accepting applications. And that was The Ohio State University, which, if you know anything about it, it's a very, very large school. But they had a good journalism program. I applied in July, got in August, and in September, without a job, I started graduate school in journalism, which was never remotely part of the plan, but that's what happens in life. It sort of takes these detours. So I started what they call J school. And I was really looking for experience writing and editing so that I could, further my writing career. But the school had a very good journalism school, as I said, but their focus in the graduate program was on research methodology, history, surveying in journalism, just not stuff that I was interested in. Luckily, they required me, since I didn't have an undergraduate in journalism, my undergraduate degree was just in English, they required that I take journalism classes, undergraduate journalism classes, working for the Lantern, which is their student newspaper, learning how to write, learning how to edit journalistically. And so I took those classes, and that started helping me with my writing. And then I got an assistantship through a connection of mine. A professor just, I think, was being kind to me. So he got me an assistantship at the Agricultural Information Office at The Ohio State University. For those of you who don't know about Ohio, Ohio is a big ag state. But little old me who'd grown up in Ohio knew nothing about agriculture. I knew what corn looked like in the fields. Other than that, I didn't know later on I realized what soybean fields looked like. I should have known back then, but I had no clue those were soybean fields. I just knew corn. So I had a lot to learn at this assistantship, but it did teach me to help me to write. And I wrote about soybean cyst nematodes and pest control and all this stuff I didn't know. But it was good. And I was learning one of my first big life lessons, which was that all experience prepares you for future experiences, even if they seem dissimilar on the surface. And in this particular case, it meant that my writing, even though I was writing agriculture stuff and articles for newspapers about, like I said, pest control, it was helping me to, in my creative writing, I was learning how to convey something that I wanted to convey, how to say it concisely, paying attention to what the reader needed to know, and all that would eventually help me with creative writing. And so that was good. But I wasn't very happy in my journalism graduate school program. It was a 2-year program, and 1 year in, I decided I was gonna quit. And I was so happy. I remember running around, calling up my friends and saying, I'm out of here. I'm so happy. I'm not going to come back in the fall. It was spring. I was whooping it up and celebrating. And then my father called. And my dad's on this thing. So he probably remembers this. I actually didn't tell him. I know I didn't call him to tell him I was quitting J school. So I think he got wind of it through my mom, who I'm sure I did tell. At any rate, he called me up and he said, you know what, Shuly, you're already halfway through your program. It was a 2-year program. And he said, you should finish it up. You'll never regret a master's degree. And I'm getting a little choked up because I love my dad. But I was learning that you need to pay attention to people who care the most about you. And I knew he had my best interest at heart. So I paid attention and decided I wasn't going to quit J school after all. But I knew I was just so unhappy there. It was such a big school. I just felt lost and I wasn't enjoying what I was studying. So I decided that in the fall, I would start to take creative writing classes as part of my electives. You had a certain number of electives you could take outside of the journalism program. So I looked at what was available and I said, okay, you're going to take some creative writing and you're going to get through this program. Well, I decided I wanted to do a poetry class. I was always looking at the graduate students who were studying English and being very envious of them. So I looked up who was teaching poetry, and they had a new poetry professor coming to the Ohio State University at that time. And everybody was really excited about her. She was a big deal. And I thought, great, I'm going to take a graduate level course of poetry with her. I'm so excited. But because I wasn't an English student, I had to submit my poems to her for her to, let me in her class or not. So I sent off my poems, and this was quite a few years ago. So this is like just the start of email. So she didn't call me up on my cell phone. I didn't have a cell phone back there or anything, but she looked over my work and she wrote me back and she said, I'm not going to let you in the class. Your poems are too sentimental. I was not happy about this at all. So I thought, wait a minute. But I decided I wasn't going to let someone else decide that I wasn't good enough at something. So I took a different class for that quarter, and then I kept looking for another poetry professor, and I found another one. I found David Citino at The Ohio State University. I sent off my poems to him. He said, welcome to my class. I'd love to have you. And for my second quarter, my second year of graduate school, I started studying with him. I actually ended up taking, I think, 3 different classes with him. But I remember that first one that I went to, it was in the English department, which I don't know if it's still housed in the same building, but at the time it was a little bit of a rundown building. The room that we were in was kind of crappy. And the only nice part about it was it had a row of windows, but it was supposed to be this kind of, small seminar. So it had like old couches and old beat up chairs. It looked like someone's garage. I didn't care. I was so happy. I didn't care what it looked like. I was so happy to be with these people, and I felt like I'd found my tribe of people. I was just thrilled. And I learned so much from David Citino and the other students. And really those classes are what got me through my graduate school program in journalism. And I never did regret the master's degree when I finished it. It was good advice to finish it. And it actually did serve me well. I ended up doing communications for my entire career. Even if communication wasn't part of my official title, I made it so that I would do communications. And I was learning that I had to get the experience that I wanted. Nobody was going to hand it to me. I had to go out and get the experience that I needed. So for example, my first job out of graduate school was working for an insurance company doing computer templates, which I can tell you is as boring as it sounds. But what I did was I begged my boss and his boss to work on articles for the employee newsletter. They had an internal employee newsletter, and I said, please let me write articles. They allowed me to do that. Some of my next jobs, when I taught in Mexico, I ran the student newspaper. I wrote articles for the student newspaper. I was always getting writing and editing somehow into my job. I worked in admissions, recruiting students for 2 colleges. I begged to do publications. I was always just making it part of my job. And it ended up that eventually I would become a full-time writer and editor for a nonprofit years later. But always, I was trying to get the experience that I needed. But as my career moved on, I just kind of gave up the idea of that MFA in poetry. It seemed, you get started with work and it just seems far off. And I realized I didn't think I needed to have an MFA to write. And I still think that's true. You do not need a Master's of Fine Arts to write, to become an author, anything. So life went on. I still wrote poetry. I continued to write poetry. And if I was in a new city, I would find a group to join for poetry, or I'd create my own. And I still write poetry to this day. But it was about 10 years ago that I started attending the Antioch Writers Workshop in my home state of Ohio, and it's actually in my hometown of Ohio. The first year that I was at the Antioch Writers Workshop, it was a summer week-long workshop, I took creative nonfiction. And for those of you who don't know what creative nonfiction is, it's a large category of work in which a writer uses novelists or storytelling techniques like plot, character, setting to write true stories. Memoir fits underneath that, but creative nonfiction can include all sorts of different things besides memoir. Memoir is just a little subcategory. So I was in the creative nonfiction class, and there was a memoir class going on that first year. It was 2009 summer, and I thought, that's what I want to be doing. I knew that I had some stories from my life that I wanted to tell about love that had come and gone from my life, and about learning what home means, but I didn't know what that would end up looking like. But the next summer, I started taking memoir workshops at the Antioch Writers Workshop instead of the whole creative nonfiction thing. I was zooming in on what I wanted. And in 2010, I also started writing. I decided when I was going to write my memoir, I thought, I know kind of generally what it's going to be about, but I don't know how it's going to look. So I started writing down memories from my life. And I would write 500 words a day every morning. I was a full-time writer and editor by then. And so I spent my entire day in front of the computer, and I knew if I waited till 5 o'clock, I didn't want to look at this computer anymore. I didn't want to think about words. I wanted to be out in the yard. I wanted to be cooking, working with my hands. So I did it in the morning, and 500 words is really not a lot. I remember I have a teacher, Matthew Goodman, who asked me, why not 1,000 words? And I said, no. 500 words I know is manageable, and I know I'll do it. You make me do 1,000, and that just can sometimes feel overwhelming. I'm going to make it small and manageable. And if you do start taking the small steps towards your dream, they really do add up. I did that for a year and a half. I just did 500 words a day every morning. It would just be a memory dump. It wasn't even well-constructed sentences. It was just a memory dump of whatever I felt like putting on the page that morning that was related to the memoir. And every summer I would go back to Antioch Writers Workshop, and I would learn more about memoir writing. I learned so much from that workshop. One summer we had a teacher named Joyce Dyer. And in the Antioch Writers Workshop, you were often in a small group of about 12 students, and you would each turn in a manuscript of about 20, 25 pages. And throughout the week that you were together, you would eventually get your manuscript critiqued, and everybody would get their manuscript critiqued. So you always turn in your manuscript at the beginning of the week, and then, later you'd get it back. But that first day, Joyce Dyer, she got all of our manuscripts, and then she one by one handed them back to us. And she said, I want you to go home tonight, and I want you to read over what you've written. I was like, okay, and she said, I want you to tell me what wasn't on the page. What were you afraid to say? What did you leave out? And that was really important advice for me, not only for memoir writing, but for fiction writing. It made me realize that real stories, go beyond the surface of events, go beyond the plot. And that was really helpful to me. So one morning, this was quite a few years ago, I came back from Antioch Writers Workshop, and as usual, I was excited, and my husband and I, we walk every morning. I'm an extrovert, if you can't tell, and he's an introvert. And I always say that by the end of the day, he's run out of words. So we take our walks in the morning when he still has all of his words, his full rim of words, and we can have conversation. So we were out on our morning walk, and I don't know how an MFA came up. I think I was talking about maybe someone getting their MFA. It wasn't related to me. And he turned to me and he said to me, why aren't you getting an MFA? And I thought, wow, I don't know. So I had really thought that dream was over. And I was no longer interested in MFA in poetry. I was interested in studying memoir. So I ended up researching schools, and because there's no full residency program where I live, I ended up doing a low residency program, Queen's University in Charlotte. And I studied creative nonfiction / memoir. I was really focused on memoir. And I had a teacher there, Natalie Koosh. If you ever meet Natalie Koosh or you see her, she has a patch over one eye. And she had an accident at an early age where she lost her sight in one eye, and her memoir is about how she adapted afterwards. And she said that her publisher really pushed her to put the accident of what happened, with her eye in her memoir. And she said, to me, that was insignificant. She said, I put it in, but it was for them. She said, really to her, she said, to me, the best stories of memoir are not the sensational stories, the, year I spent in Afghanistan, or, this huge thing I did. And she said, those are fine. She said, but for her, the real memoir stories were about the mundane and how you adapt to something and making meaning out of the mundane and daily things. And that gave me hope, because what I was writing about was not sensational. I was writing about love that had come and gone in my life. I was writing about my divorce. I was writing about things that are common experiences. And that's also true with my fiction writing. But at the time, I wasn't writing fiction. So I didn't realize how important that piece of advice was going to be for later. So it was during so we had different semesters, obviously, for my MFA program. And I was in the summer between my first and second semester of my MFA program in studying memoir. And I was supposed to be focused on writing my memoir, but I'd been, writing this memoir for several years already, and I felt really stuck. And I remember thinking that I just felt really confined by writing about truth. I'm one of those people, when you write a memoir, I think you have to stick to the truth. You don't make up characters, you don't make up dialogue. So I was just feeling really confined by truth and by my memory and by my life. And I started writing fiction for the first time in decades. And I was just doing it for fun, just for something to be fun for me, just to let loose. And then I would go back to my memoir. And I had so much fun writing short stories that summer that I knew by the end of the summer that I wanted to study fiction writing in my MFA program. In my MFA program, you could study up to 2 genres, but you had to apply to study for a second genre. They didn't just let you in like, oh, I want to write poetry. They wouldn't just say, oh, come on in. You had to submit samples. So I wrote my director and I said, I'd really like to study fiction too. And he said, fine, you'll have to send in a writing sample. Well, all I had were the stories that I'd written that summer. And I can assure you they were not very good. I really thought of myself in fiction writing as a very beginning writer. With memoir, I'd really developed my voice over the years. I'd learned so much about it. I was on a very different level than fiction writing. Fiction writing, I was on what I call the C-spot run level. If you remember the little Dick and Jane books, they have the little C-spot run. Well, that's where I was with fiction writing. I was just like so concerned about plot that I was just trying to get character A to character B. And I was having fun, but I knew I wasn't very good. So I sent in my work to my director of my program, my MFA program. His name's Fred. And I sent off my samples, and he very kindly said to me, these aren't very good, but I'm going to let you in the fiction writing program. I knew I had a lot to learn. He said, the good thing is that creative nonfiction and memoir writing, they cross over a lot with fiction. There's a lot of different crossover with, like I said, you use storytelling techniques for one to tell true stories. So there was a lot of crossovers. He said, you're going to learn a lot, you'll be fine. So I got to study with someone named Elisa Chappelle during my MFA program, and I learned so much from her. But when I finished my MFA, I knew I still had a lot to learn. And that was because of me, not because of the program. I had spent more time studying, worrying about memoir than about fiction. So I had a lot to learn when I graduated. So I kept studying fiction writing, and I had finished my memoir. That was the good part. My memoir, which is called The Going and Goodbye. That was my thesis for my MFA program. And I got to work so much on it. It was wonderful to get all that feedback. And about within a year after I graduated, I had a publisher for my book, and I was thrilled. But I was still learning a lot about fiction. Luckily, I had the opportunity to do a weekend workshop with New York, in the industry, we call them like the big 5 publishers. They're the publishers that you've heard of. And there was an editor from one of the big publishers, and I had the chance to do a weekend workshop with her. So Friday to Sunday, really intense. There were only 4 of us in the class. And I was so excited about this weekend workshop with her for my fiction writing. I submitted the only the novel that actually has never been published. The only thing that it was a big manuscript, but I submitted the first 20 pages, and it was my first attempt at a novel. I was very excited. And at the beginning of the weekend, she said to us, look, when I do these workshops, usually by the end, someone cries. And I thought, oh no, that's probably going to be me. And it wasn't that far from the truth. It was a brutal weekend. She one by one tore our manuscripts apart, but I think she went in the order of the ones she liked best. Mine was last, and she ripped it apart, in my mind, the most. That could be just me imagining things. But I will tell you that when she and I had a one-on-one, she picked up my manuscript and she said, okay, I write the most on the pages that have the most potential. And then she proceeded to flip through it and show me that she hadn't written on most of the pages of my manuscript, which was really hard to hear. But that's okay. I tried to sort of pick myself up after that weekend, and I had a really hard time. I could not look at that novel for 2 months. And I went back to poetry writing, which is sort of my go-to genre. And then after 2 months, I told myself, you know what, you can either keep feeling sorry for yourself or you can get back on the horse and get going. And so after 2 months, I started writing short stories again. Now, over that weekend that we'd had with her, I knew her intention was not to be mean at all. Her intention was to cram in as much advice and critique for us so that we could become better writers. And she had, for all of us, she'd taught us in a sort of class setting that weekend. She'd given us all a bunch of do's and don'ts to do in writing for fiction. And so I took out that list, and it was a long list. She said, all of you need to do this. And I looked at that list and I started to apply what she had taught us to my writing. And darn it if I didn't become a better writer because of it. I actually became a much better and stronger writer by following what she'd said. And I am still to this day forever grateful to her for what I learned. I remember that summer that followed, this was in the fall, and that summer that followed, I was writing news stories, and I was having her advice sort of in the background of my head. And I was applying it as I wrote. And I thought, these stories are better than what I was writing before. So I went back to my old stories and I started applying her techniques and her advice to the old stories, and they became better and stronger. But you never know whether you're really getting better or you just imagine you're getting better. But one of the confirmations that I had come far was when I finished my short story collection. I had a publisher for it, Press 53. And this is the book that just came out a few weeks ago. I sent it to my MFA program director, Fred. And I said, would you mind blurbing my book? And blurbing are these little blurbs in the back that they have that say, you know, like, this is, you know, award-winning and you a must read and all that. So he wrote a blurb for my book very generously, and I got it back and I said, thank you so much. It was a really nice blurb. And I wrote him an email and I said, just thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. And he said, he wrote me back and he said, and I'm going to get choked up again. He said, you don't have to thank me. He said, your work has come a long way from when you sent in that writing sample. And he called my work, and I still have these 3 words memorized: authoritative, intelligent, and surprising. And that was like, I won't say it's better than the Pulitzer because I wouldn't mind getting a Pulitzer, but it felt like a big award to have Fred say that about my work. I have a lot of respect for him. You know, years ago, at the Antioch Writers Workshop, I had a teacher named Matthew Goodman. I mentioned him earlier when I was talking, and he talked about how he went to graduate school and he got an MFA in fiction, and he said he was among some very, very strong writers in his MFA program. And he said, but you know what? He said, I'm the only one of that whole group that's still writing. And he said, you know why? He said, I wasn't the best writer. He said, I'm just the only one who refused to leave the party. And so I think about that. I think about him when I think about perseverance, because I do think perseverance pays off. He asked me, it's been 6 years now, but he asked me 6 summers ago, he said, promise me 5 years from now, you'll be writing. And I said, sure, okay. That seemed really easy. And I'm still writing to this day. But I think I'm like him. It's not that I, you know, have some special gift where I have a published book. I think I just didn't give up. So now I'm going to do a short reading from my book. When I studied with Elisa Chappell during my MFA program, she said that she thought some of the best fictional stories started with a kernel of truth. So I'm going to read us the first 2 pages, very short reading, just 2 pages of the start of a story that starts with a kernel of truth from my life. And this is called The Snowstorm. Seymour shows up in a snowstorm to see her. His chest is like a radiator, and he unfastens the toggle buttons of his wool coat as he stands at a gas station in Oriana, Ohio, just down the street from where Flavia lives now, a street he has never been on before, which he wants to stand on tomorrow, next week, next month, until he can convince her to move away from this rural town and to DC with him. Seymour did not warn Flavia he was coming, just got into his yellow truck with chains on the tires and clanked through 3 states that felt like forever. He feels a hum in his chest, this close, but still a few blocks left to go. His hand trembles as he dials the payphone. She picks up, hello? And he can picture Flavia's sweep of black hair, her chocolate eyes, and the way she puckers her mouth while she waits. He says, it's me. Oh, she says, it's you. Snowflakes stutter down all around him. I'm glad you called, she says, and he imagines Flavia winding the phone cord like a ring around her finger. I was going to call you tonight, she says. You were? He says. We need to talk. Okay. Seymour squints up at the gray sky, which should be so much darker except for the storm and the street lamps' fluorescence. Here I am, he says. He lets snow drop into his eyes. She says, I've been thinking a lot about it. I really have. I don't want you to think I haven't or that I would make some snap decision. I know that. I know you. But I just don't think we should try again. Snow sticks to his red beard and wool cap. Wet flakes melt onto his neck. He tucks the phone between his ear and shoulder, tears off his gloves, and pushes the toggle buttons back into their nooses one by one. Are you still there? She asks. He says he is. He feels wobbly and numb. I'm sorry, she says. Don't be sorry. The snow has seeped through his right boot, through some crack or crevice Seymour did not know of. His sock is now soggy. But I know you were hoping for something else, she says, and I was too, but can I see you? Seymour, I don't think that's such a good idea. Last time that happened, I told you, he says, I've changed. He takes hold of the silver umbilical cord connecting the phone to the receiver. Seymour, I'm coming over, he says. What, tonight? You'll never get a flight, she says. Nothing is landing in this. If I come, will you see me, he asks. He pictures her squinting as if she were seeing something at a great distance and gauging its danger. He pictures the small gold hoops in her ears, punctuating the sides of her face. A car powers by, spraying Seymour with gray slush. I have to be at work early tomorrow morning, she says. I'm an hour from any major airport. I'm too hard to get to tonight. Let me decide that. She sighs. Okay, fine. Check the flights yourself. You'll see. A snowstorm would never stop me, he says, and when she does not respond, he lets her off the phone. It is better if he faces her. After all these months, he cannot wait any longer, and he fires up the yellow truck, and it chugs him the last few blocks to where he knows he's meant to be. Thank you all. That's it. You can ask any questions if you have any questions.
That was a beautiful reading. Thanks so much. I just want to let everybody know again, if you've got a question, you can use the chat box, or you can, in the participant window, just raise your hand and I'll keep an eye out and we'll go kind of down the row for people.
And sorry I get choked up, but that's just kind of how I am these days.
You know, these are interesting times. I think everybody's emotions are heightened, but I think even when you talk about your work, you have such a, I mean, as an author, I know that when we talk about our work, we have such a strong connection. It's difficult not to get,
sure,
you know, not to get emotional sometimes. So I completely understand.
Thank you.
Yeah. And as we're waiting for questions, I just want to ask you a couple of things that I was thinking of when you, so with your story, your short story collection, I have a question about titles, how do you come up with a title? Because sometimes a title is very telling about what the reader can expect in the following pages. Is that something that comes to you first? Do you ever write a story after you've thought of the title, or do you create the title after you've written the story?
That's a great question. I'm one of those people who comes up with the title after I've finished the story. I don't think I've ever come up with the title first for anything. Poetry, essays, short stories. I usually it's funny, I'll write it all and then I will come up with the title by reading through it, and something will pop out at me and I'll just know that's the title. I used to hate titles. I used to hate titling things, and now I love it because I feel like titles are the chance to, like you said, give a signal to the reader about something. So I love coming up with titles. Now, I did not come up with the title from my book, although this is a line from my work. I actually had a different title for my short story collection. My publisher didn't like it. So he said, I'll publish your book, but we need a new title. So he and my editor, the publisher and the editor, we started brainstorming together. And the editor was the one who, again, it's a line from my book. She pulled it out and she said, what do you think about this as the title for your book? And I said, it's perfect. So that line does come up if you read the short story collection.
Awesome, thank you. And I see, Tracy, you've got a question. Did you want to ask that directly?
Yes, hi. I'm actually a ag communications graduate from Ohio State,
Yay!
1994. So yeah, you don't meet many people who have gone through the ag school communications.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm from Ohio too, but living in Maryland now. So my question is, I wrote a children's picture book manuscript, and I belong to a writers group who's going to be doing some critiquing about it this week. What's the next step after that? Do you get an editor? Like what's the process?
Are you working, I mean, have you submitted it for, so you're asking before you submit it for publication, or?
Yeah, so so I have it sort of, you know, in a good place, and I have like a peer review with I joined a writers center locally, and they formed like groups. We meet on Zoom and we critique each other's work.
That's great.
So where does it go from there? Like once I have it sort of all edited by myself and reviewed by others, where do you send it? Like, do you get an editor to professionally do it, or do you?
I don't. I mean, it's up to you if you feel like it needs it. For me, I go by instinct, and I go by, you know, if I feel like it's complete and I'm ready for it to go out into the world as it is, then I start writing my query letters and looking for a publisher. If you're wanting an agent, that's different. You'd look for an agent, but still be writing query letters to agents.
Okay.
But you know, the only time that I hear of people hiring an editor, I mean, no, you can hire an editor if you're comfortable with that. When you're self-publishing, I would recommend that you hire an editor, but it doesn't sound like you want to take that route. And that's not the route I took with these two books. I found publishers for them. When you have a publisher, they will go through another editing round with you. It'd be really rare for them not to. So you will have another round of edits. So I would say you need to just feel comfortable with where you feel like it's ready. And I think that's instinct, and you probably have it. You know, there's certain pieces that you have that you say, I know this, I don't even, like, sometimes I don't even know what's wrong with it, but I know it's not ready.
Right.
And others, I'm like, this is done. I'm proud of it. It's ready to go. So I follow that instinct for when I know when it's ready to be sent out to an editor, like a magazine. If you said it's a children's book.
Yeah, a picture book.
Yeah. So that's completely out of my wheelhouse. I was going to say, if it's an adult book, oftentimes they do recommend that you try to publish different parts of it, about 30% of your book, before you send it to a publisher, and you try to publish it in as high a level of magazine as you can. But it's different with, I don't know anything about children's books, but I'm excited for you. That's really exciting.
Yeah, it's you know, I had a lot of time. I work at an elementary school, and our days are sort of shortened, our work days. So I kind of took advantage of, there's so many classes right now, writer centers, and that are offering these Zoom classes that are free. And so it was like, yeah, why not take advantage of this time and really use it? So
that's great.
Things like this. So yeah,
that's wonderful.
I'm excited.
Yeah, and you know, I don't see, I'm on several lists of call for submissions. Some are from publishers. I do run into children's stuff every once in a while. It's mostly adult stuff. But if you want to email me, I can send you those lists of places. And again, it's going to be hit or miss, whether they're not focused on children's at all, but you will see every once in a while a call for submissions for children's on some of these. So just email me and I can send you that list.
Okay, and your email's on the website, right?
I can give it to you right now too.
Okay.
It's on my website. It's SHULY CAWOOD, shulycawood@gmail.com.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. And it's nice to meet you. We crossed over. I graduated with my master's in journalism in 1993.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if you ever worked where Stan Ernst in the ag information office, but that was my boss. He was fabulous.
I also worked there too. That may sound, I know it's been so long, but yeah, I worked in the in one of the ag information,
Nice.
with video and
Yeah.
writing. So I did a lot of internships because I knew, I don't know, I was so impatient to sort of sit in classes. So I filled up on internships, and
That's great.
that was really the secret to success there. So
Great. Well, it's nice to meet you.
nice to meet you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Shuly, we've got a couple more questions, one from Alita. So Alita, if you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask her.
Thank you. Hi,
Hey.
Shuly.
Hey,
Congratulations.
thank you.
So cool. I just want to say, I've always been very inspired, and I love your writing, and you're just so
thank you.
prolific.
Oh, thank you.
One of the things that I know you've mentioned this before also about, your process of putting it all down. You said you spent 1.5 years just putting down what you want to write, what ended up being in your book. And I think that that's very sound advice. My question is, how do you, 1.5 years is a long time. How do you continue to trust that process? That at the end of it, you are going to get what you need.
Faith? I don't know. I didn't even, that's funny. It never occurred to me that I wouldn't, certainly when I finished up that time, it's not like I never added anything else. And it really was just like, it was things like, I'm not exaggerating. Like I remember going to, I'm making up something, but like a high school dance, and it was, I wore a pink dress. It was not anything, the writing was not, I was just I knew I was going to forget things. So it was a memory dump, and I didn't care how it sounded. I wasn't writing the thing. I was writing for content only, strictly. So, when you do that for so long, you start to see patterns of what you're writing about and what you're focusing on. And sometimes you'll start writing about, like, let's say a dance from high school, and you realize that's not where your mind is taking you. So you trust your mind to let you go where it needs to go. I'm sure you've found that in writing, where suddenly you're writing about a tea kettle, like something random that your grandmother gave you, or so I always trust my brain to let me wander where it needs to. Now, of course, some of those days weren't just 500 words. Sometimes I would go on, I would let my mind wander to where it needed to, but your brain does so much of the work for you. It's amazing what I would trust your brain to figure that out. If you keep writing every day and do memory dumps, you will start to see patterns. You will start to see things that you're interested in of what you've written. Other stuff, like a lot of that stuff never went anywhere that I wrote. I did not keep those 500 words a day in the final content. This book is only so long. So, but there were definite things that I was drawn to writing more about, and that your mind figures it out as you write. So I would trust your brain to draw you where it needs to.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
I think so. I think for me, it's something to do also with patience, also, and having trust in the fact that this will get, that the time invested in the work will produce what it needs to. I try and look for small wins sometimes, just to continue to feel like, to stay the course, because sometimes you wake up and I try and work on this and I go like, what are you doing?
Yeah. And that happens.
And I think times like that is when you have to lean into the process, and I'm trying to do that. So that, I just wondered if you.
Well, now my particular memoir, I got this advice from Antioch early on. She said, try writing essays. And so essays are small and manageable in a way that writing a full length, a typical memoir is not. Mine really is a memoir. And essays, though, there are characters that you have to know about at the beginning that develop throughout the memoir. So I want people to read it chronologically. But the truth is that each chapter is sort of a snapshot. Yeah. And so I think there was a lot I got from when I would finish a piece of it and I would send it out into the world as a standalone piece. And I would say, if you can find nuggets, and I've read some of your work, you have standalone pieces. Yeah. I would polish those, send them out into the world, and then see where they fit in your bigger manuscript later, and get your, what you need, for nourishment and for knowing that you're going down the right path by polishing smaller parts of it along the way.
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Howard has a question. Go ahead,
Howard,
Hey, Shuly, it's good
how
to
are you?
yeah, I'm great. How are you?
Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you, and congratulations again on the book.
Thank
It's
you.
fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful. But a
Thank you
question
so
that I
much.
have,
Yeah.
so unlike you, when I was younger, I didn't enjoy literature, writing, especially poetry. It's something I came to like and enjoy late in life. I've been retired 2 years now, and I've joined the local poetry society, and I'm trying to learn. And I aspire to publish some poetry, but right now I'm still very much in the learning stage. And you mentioned that you don't need an MFA to write.
True.
But what is the best way to learn other than some sort of educational program? I mean, I am learning through the local society and workshops by various writers groups in the region. But at 60 years old, would you say yes or no towards exploring a low residency MFA program?
Oh, yeah, sure. If you want to do it and you can do it, yes. But what I was trying to say was it is not necessary. But
Right.
what it did do is it did accelerate my learning for the memoir. I would go back and I was taking this week-long fabulous workshop, Antioch Writers Workshop every summer. But as you can imagine, if you're doing, I was working full time, so I didn't have time to do that all the time. So that was slow, but it was a wonderful week. And I would say that eventually I would have gotten where I needed to be. It just would have taken longer. But the MFA program definitely accelerated my learning. If you can do it and want to do it, I don't know anybody who's done at least my program who didn't love it. It is wonderful. You're you're in it for 2 years or however long the program is. And you're just, yeah, it was, I mean, I would definitely recommend it if you want it. But a lot of people are like, do I have to have it? No, you don't have to have it. You can become a good writer. For those who don't want to do an MFA, I would say take classes like you're doing, take workshops, take seminars. And I would also say find a writers group with writers who are better than you. And I try to do that too. I try to find writers who are better than me so that they'll be pulling me along rather than you pulling them along. I mean, it's okay to you need to pull some people along, but have some people always ahead of you too, so that you're being pulled and getting better by their critique. I am very lucky. I have a few people who read my work regularly, and I trust their feedback. I miss things in my writing that they point out, and I don't know where my writing would be without them. So I would say that's a great way to learn too.
Sure. Okay. As far as prerequisites for a low residency MFA program, I have 3 college degrees, but they're all in chemistry.
I wouldn't worry about that. Usually what most MFA programs are concerned about your writing sample more than anything else.
Yep.
So
Okay.
find programs I picked a particular program that focused on writing more than teaching. I wasn't interested in teaching afterwards. Some MFA programs really focus on preparing you to teach, but I wanted one that they call it a studio program that was focused on writing and making you a better writer. They taught us a little bit how to teach, but there's Sandra's here. She went to the program. She knows that was not their big focus. Their big focus was on making you a better writer. So I would find, if that's what you're interested in, make sure that the program that you choose is focused on you becoming a better writer as opposed to a better teacher.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes, good luck.
And thanks for the program today.
Thank you for coming.
All right. Howard, I love that idea of a chemist becoming a poet. That's
Oh,
really
yeah.
cool. Yeah,
Yes.
so definitely keep working on your poetry. And I just wanted to ask Shuly a question. You were talking about how, I forgot who you said gave you this point about fiction, that there's a kernel of truth in fiction. And I wondered, when you're writing short stories and they begin with a kernel of truth, do you ever consider, I mean, I know writing memoir, you have to think about family and friends and acquaintances who show up in your stories, but if you're writing fiction and there's just a bit of kernel of truth, but as every writer knows, often, bits and pieces of our lives show up in
Sure.
our fiction in one way or another. do you wonder about how family and friends might read those stories if they, like one time I had my father read a very short flash fiction piece of mine that had nothing to do with him and nothing about real life from my growing up, but he saw that it did. And so I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Like, you never know how a reader is going to see your story. So how do you approach that when you write your short stories?
I didn't even think about that or worry about. So, okay, let me back up and say, Elisa Chappelle, her saying was that she thought some of the best stories started with the kernel of truth. She did not say all stories, of course, had to begin with the kernel of truth. And she did say, when you start with the kernel of truth, do not write about do not do memoir writing and just call fiction. She said, you make those stories, you make those characters take on a life of their own. They don't have your exact characteristics. If you're a little mean, you make them very mean. If they're a little bit nervous, you make them very nervous. So she talked about exaggerating their characteristics that you have, but also I can only, the stories, there are two stories in particular in my short story collection that very much, if the person who was in my life saw them, he or she would recognize that this came from, they would recognize the situation as them, but they would definitely not, I hope they would not think the characters them. So the characters definitely took on a life of their own. And then the outcomes of those stories were different than what happened in my life too. I don't ever choose what my characters do. They just do it. So because they were different people than me, they took on a life of their own and had different endings to their stories. I did not even think about people. I did not worry about fictional characters. The only thing I was concerned about when I started getting ready to publish it was I realized that people I had named, for example, my father-in-law, his name is Tom, and one of my characters is Tommy. I wasn't even remotely thinking about him. It's not him. There's nothing about him that's like this character. So I had to call him and I just said, look, this character had a different name, but we had to change it for a different reason. I changed it to Tommy and I said, this isn't you. And he's like, I know, luckily he knows well enough that it's not him. But I started worrying about names more than anything else. And then I have a story in here that's about a family of 4. There's 2 daughters. I have a sister, my parents. And when I told my sister there was a story like that, she said, is that us? And it's set in the city where my sister lives. And she said, is that us? And I said, no. When you read the story, you will know it's not about us at all. Like, I don't resemble the either daughter character, and neither does she. So I didn't worry about it until people started asking me some funny questions, I guess, and I started worrying about things. But yeah, memoir is totally different. The memoir I did have to worry about because I was writing about real people, and that was a very different thing than writing about fictional characters.
Yep, I can totally understand that.
Yeah.
All right, well, there's just a little over 5 minutes left for the hour, so I want to give other people an opportunity to ask questions if you've got anything coming up that you're thinking of last minute. And while I wait for that for a second, I just want to say that I really appreciate hearing your journey through writing, because it's just a reminder about what you mentioned too, about perseverance. And, not everybody is our perfect reader. And so sometimes we send a story out in the world and it comes back like 50 times and you think, well, it must be horrible. But in truth, you just haven't quite found your audience. So
that's very true.
Yeah, I think yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have several pieces that eventually got published, and, one recent one, I had a poem published in the Sun magazine in May, and I submitted different pieces to the Sun magazine. I think I submitted 24 before this one got accepted, and over a decade of submissions. So people think, it's easier, it just happens overnight, and it doesn't. You have to just keep trying and not give up and not take it personally. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it is about perseverance. I did want to add one thing before we go. Someone asked about, well, different people talked about different things, but I did want to say that one of the things that has helped my writing too, for those of you who want to have something that goes out into the world regularly, is I started a blog. Actually, one of my friends, Lori Herzl, in my MFA program recommended, she said, I think that's great for anybody, a writer, to start a blog, because you get writing experience. And I started that back, years ago, and I have a subscription list. And it has helped me hone my storytelling skills. And I think that's another great way to practice writing and to get, have someone else seeing your work regularly. It's just a blog, but so it's not that big a deal, but it does help to have readers out there. And so I would recommend, if you want to do writing and want to get practice, to start a blog. I think it's really, really helpful.
Yep, that's definitely a great idea. I find that that also is a bit of accountability, because it's easy to think, oh, I'm going to start writing someday, but if you set
Right.
your own self-described deadlines, that's always helpful as well.
Yeah.
I love what you said too about starting to notice your patterns, and just thinking about what you were sharing today. Margaret Rosga, she's the Wisconsin Poet Laureate, and I was talking with a woman who's in one of my writing classes right now, and she mentioned Margaret, and she said that Margaret has this exercise where you write 13 observations a day, or even just 13 observations a week, but just simple things that you notice throughout the day. And I love that, not only because there's so much going on right now that we tend to not want to pay attention, and sometimes it's better to pay attention.
Right.
So just throughout your day, collecting those observations, but that's a great way too to start to see how you view the world and what things become important to you in expressing that view. So if you're a writer, or even if you're a reader, the things that really speak to you. So I love that idea of finding patterns.
I do too.
And I am going to put your link to your website in the chat box one more time. So I hope everybody has a chance to open that up and take a look at more of your work, and certainly your blog as well. And I want to thank you again for being here and being part of the Short Story Month and part of the Hidden Timber Book Small Press Author Reading Series. Thank you all for showing up on a Sunday afternoon. It's so great to see some lovely faces, and to hear the discussion about writing, and to give you an opportunity to check out some new books. So pop over to hiddentimberbooks.com as well. We've got some more readings coming up. Shuly, I hope to get a copy of your book soon. Just the short reading that you did was so intriguing. I think it's probably a great collection. So thank you again for sharing that. And I'll be here for a few more minutes if you want to just take a peek at her website. Make sure you get that bookmarked. And thank you again, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you coming. And email me if you have any other questions that you think of. I'm always available for those. Thanks, you all. It's nice to see your faces.